It's about a support program that was launched in Sweden in early 2009 in response to the financial crisis in 2008, in response to a perceived liquidity problem of Swedish companies at the time. And it offered the chance for companies to postpone paying in labor-related taxes as a way to kind of supply them with liquidity in the crisis. Well, actually quite many features. So typically these kinds of programs to support companies in terms of liquidity and financing are typically targeted to certain types of companies, smaller companies. So you have to qualify in that regard. It typically has an application procedure, so it might take some time. In this case, it was within an already existing system that you could just kind of tick a box that you would like to defer paying taxes. And it was also open to pretty much all companies. And it's up to the company itself to decide whether it was liquidity constrained or not a government official or something. So that's quite unique and quite interesting, and also fit for the purpose that it was a problem within the financial sector. And this kind of bypassed the financial sector to supply liquidity in a transitory way in the crisis. In theory, if you took this option to kind of postpone paying taxes, it would then show up as a loan on your balance sheet to the government. And so then we wanted to make sure that, well, you might take the loan from the government and just repay private credit, so you just substitute it away. So we didn't really, then what's really the purpose then? So we want to see whether they actually increase net debt. So do they add this debt on top of what they already had? And that we see they did. And we also can see that actually it was the part of the balance sheet that was non-bank debt that increased as they took this loan. And then again, focusing on the balance sheet, we see that on the other side of the balance sheet, it was current assets that expanded as a response. So it looks like the purpose was met, that companies took the loan and used it to kind of improve short-term liquidity, as was the purpose. So the kinds of firms, so one really exciting part as a researcher about this program was that it kind of revealed what companies that were liquidity constrained in a crisis. That's typically not an observable we can see. So typically we want to approximate these kinds of firms. And we kind of trying to understand which companies that took it based on the literature on financial and liquidity constraints and the characteristics they typically show. And it was very similar. So it was typically younger companies, companies with lower cash flows, lower cash holdings. They paid less dividends, they had less internal capital. But on the other hand, they also had higher leverage ratios. They already had more debt, and they had also drawn their credit lines more aggressively leading into the crisis. So it was like actively kind of low equity, high kind of debt companies that typically, and younger companies that took this loan. Not exclusively, but on average. So that's kind of the main outcome we focus on. That's also an important feature of why the government did this. So we focus both like really in the immediate term and looking 4 years out, both on bankruptcy rates and financial distress, which is more of so bankruptcy is like fairly like unique, not as common, whereas distress kind of happens to more companies. And just to start with, it's not obvious what to expect. Because you could be like, if the program works as it was intended, that it supplies liquidity to companies in a transitory way, then you could see that bankruptcy goes down and distress goes down. But if it doesn't target the right firms, it targets these really risky, highly levered firms that then it might actually increase bankruptcies and increase distress. But what we find is we don't really see any impact that bankruptcies go up or down, which in one sense I guess is good news, but it doesn't really reduce bankruptcies. But what we find, which I think is one of the more exciting findings, is that actually the levels of financial distress of the firms taking this went down quite a lot, both looking short term and also looking 4 years out. So that seems like the program really worked in that regard. To the best of our knowledge, when this was launched in 2008, 2009, it was quite unique. And also going around presenting this at academic conferences, it seemed like it was unique for people from other countries. And then Sweden launched it again in the COVID-19 pandemic, but a much larger scale, including more taxes you could postpone. And then, for whatever reason, a lot of other, at least developed countries, also used a similar program, which I don't know what the influence comes from, but the way we look in the study, about 75% of OECD countries had a version of this program that they launched in the COVID-19 pandemic as well. So that seems like someone has not necessarily read our paper, but like get knowledge about this program and kind of how nimble and kind of relatively cost effective it is. So I was in fact the scientific reviewer of the report, which I was asked because they actually built or they used our methodology to evaluate the COVID-19 program. And quite remarkably, actually, so their scope is a little larger than ours. They look at like fiscal costs and stuff we don't really look at, but they do run the same tests as we do, but on data that's obviously for the pandemic, and they actually find almost identical results, which is pretty striking. They find that distress goes down, no impact on bankruptcies, very similar kinds of companies in terms of the characteristics take this loan. So it's quite remarkable that it seems to have a similar kind of uptake into what kinds of firms 13, 14 years later in a different kind of crisis. Actually, this is one part of the evaluation that they look broader, and also the application going from the financial crisis to the COVID-19 pandemic. What they did was, so in the crisis, it was perfectly kind of tailored to the problem, like providing liquidity in a financial crisis. It wasn't as perfectly tailored for the pandemic, where you had pretty much everything in the economy and society shocked at the same time. It was not just a negative supply shock to finance, it was demand shocks. And that had some consequences. I think the general idea of the program, I think is really nice, but I think you need to think hard about what problem do you want to fix, and maybe then alter certain things, not just apply it in an expanded way as it was done in the COVID-19 pandemic. I think that's the main thing. But really keep this idea alive. I think it's a really nice policy with very unique features that seems to be kind of well appreciated by companies.